All right, I'd like to introduce our next candidate, who's statewide. JJ Ament is running for state treasurer, and at least that's what he tells us. So I've asked JJ to come down, share a little bit about himself. Also, JJ, if you could sort of tell us what the state treasurer does, why it's important. It's held by a Democrat right now. And why is it important that this is going to be a change of party for the seat next year?
Sure. Thank you very much. Okay, are there any questions?
Yeah, what do you think?
I told you, we were talking earlier about the use of a motorcycle engine like that because the cars can't always hear the horn. Through the day, we were there. We were talking about that. Thank you very much. My name's JJ Ament. I'll tell you a little bit about myself. I grew up on a farm and a ranch in northeast Colorado, about 20 miles northeast of Sterling. I've lived here my whole life. I went to a place called Caliche High School, which is a small little school on a hill in the middle of a pasture. There were 21 kids in my graduating class and 102 of us in the whole high school. We are this year's single A state boys basketball champions, though, so hooray for Caliche Buffalo. But that's my background. That's kind of where I learned the values of hard work and the value of a dollar. I went to the University of Colorado. My degree is in finance. And for the last 10 years, my business has been working with state treasurers and other government CFOs from around the country to run their offices better and to deliver some value to their taxpayers and make sure that there was some efficiency in what they did. Sort of novel concepts, things that people in the business community do all the time. Things in government that sometimes get lost. The state treasurer in Colorado is supposed to be the state CFO, because we don't have, believe it or not, anybody else in state government that is the CFO. Every single department of state government has their own person that they call a CFO, but there's nobody sitting on top of the entire organization looking at how government does things and determining whether it's a good idea or a bad idea. So I'm happy to come down and tell you a little bit about what the state treasurer does and a couple of things that we really need your help. Number one, we need to start winning elections for Republicans.
Yeah.
And that's first and foremost something that all of you can be part of. And as Eli mentioned, find a candidate that you like, that you're inspired by or believe in or you just think is a cool person, and support them in those elections. And get out and walk and talk to your friends, and it can be very simple stuff. You can be as little or as much involved as you like. And as candidates, there's nothing that makes people feel better than when somebody comes up and says they'd like to help out or introduce you to my friends or say hi. So let's win these elections. The second thing, and this is maybe as important as the first, when Republicans win elections, let's do what we promised we'd do during our campaign. Let's govern like Republicans. We're going to run on fiscally conservative ideas. Let's go ahead and do fiscally conservative things when we're in those offices. And then second and third thing that we can do as part of that is sort of rebuild our brand by winning elections and doing what we promised we'd do. I think that will rebuild our brand for Republicans. I've been a Republican my whole life. And I'll tell you a quick story. I went to CU again. 102 kids in my whole high school. My political science class my freshman year at CU had 508 students. Chem 140, which is a gigantic auditorium. And the political science professor says, well, how many of the people in here are Democrats? You know, maybe more than a third about raised their hand. Said, well, how many in here are Republicans? Sort of another third raised their hand. And the professor got right up in front of one of the girls in the front row and said, well, why are you a Republican? She was nervous, big crowd. Said, well, both my parents were Republicans. He says, well, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. If both your parents were morons, what would you make you? She says, well, probably a Democrat. I don't know how you choose to be part of your party, and we pick on Democrats, but, the problem right now is that the current state treasurer, Democrat Kerry Kennedy, is actually a very good friend of mine. I like her very much personally. She shouldn't be the state treasurer of Colorado. No financial background whatsoever before this job. Spent her entire career in the government sector or in the nonprofit sector that lobby in the government sector. And now as state treasurer of Colorado, she sits at the intersection really between the legislative branch and the executive branch on an $18 billion government enterprise. $18 billion. That's what the state budget, that's what the state of Colorado will spend this year. Now about half of that is federal money, But as you might expect, any money that comes from Washington is still your money. It's just made a trip to D.C. before it's made it back to Colorado. And it comes with all kinds of strings attached on how it can be spent, what it must be spent on. And then the other half of that money, about 40% of it goes right off the top to K-12 education, 20% of it's Medicaid, and then 10-10-10 essentially between human services, corrections, and higher ed. And now, just like that, in that span of what, 60 seconds, I just spent $18 billion. So you can see how easy it is for things to slip through the cracks, and for there to be millions upon millions of dollars lost every year for no good reason. And it's the treasurer's job, in my opinion, to stop that from happening. It's the treasurer's job to tell the governor when he's messing up, Governor, you're messing up. And it might surprise you, or it might not, know that $18 billion spent this year, $30 billion or so, give or take, since Governor Ritter and Kerry Kennedy assumed their offices, and $30 billion. Do you know how many times Kerry Kennedy, as the independent state treasurer, has disagreed with Bill Ritter, our governor? None. Not a single time. More than $30 billion over 2 years, and they haven't disagreed even one time about how my wife and I can't go to the Walmart on anything without arguing about whether we want it or need it or think it should be this color or that color. And yet these two have spent $30 billion of our money and not one time? So now you've seen a lot in the paper, you talk to the legislators, they have a hard job to do because balancing that budget, which is required under Colorado's Constitution, and thank goodness it is, because we can't mint money like they do in Washington, D.C. So it's hard to find. But I get a little upset when I hear people talk about state deficits and how we have to cover a budget deficit, because it really doesn't exist in Colorado. There's a certain amount of money that is raised from the taxes that are levied on our people, and that's how much you have to spend. So there's never really a deficit, okay? If you don't raise as much money, you got to spend less money. And that's just the way it goes. So it's not like Washington where we have deficits and so we can borrow to cover that amount. At the same time, though, the state of Colorado doesn't have enough money coming in every month in a regular flow to be able to support all of the spending that it does in a regular flow. So the state treasurer of Colorado has to cover those shortfalls so that when the governor writes a check, it's the treasurer's job to make sure that check doesn't bounce. To do that, the treasurer of Colorado borrows more than $1 billion every year to cover those cash flows. And what's frustrating to me as a guy who came from the financial background in the private sector who called on governments, including Kerry Kennedy, is when I go to Kerry Kennedy and I tell her, Kerry, you're going to borrow $1 billion this year. And if you do it like the bureaucratic staff who's married to the status quo and has done it the same way they've done it every year for the last 20 years, if you do it that way, chances are you're going to lose millions of dollars for nothing. And so we showed her, here's how you do it using modern-day private sector financial principle to end the speculation that puts the state taxpayer at risk. Well, Kerry, having, again, super nice lady, but no finance background, has no confidence to overrule the career staff. So they do it the exact same way that it's been done every year before, and sure enough, at the end of the year, I walked back over to the state treasurer's office and said, guys, you lost $7.5 million this year on that one program alone. $7.5 million. And here's the charts and graphs to prove it. Because you speculated on interest rates with the taxpayers' money and you guessed wrong. Do you know what the deputy treasurer of the state of Colorado, the #2 person in the office, told me? In the basement of the Capitol building, Eric Roghoff said, well, we didn't really lose $7.5 million. We just spent more than we needed to. And I didn't know what to say. You
say that's why I'm running for this position.
There was $7.5 million here before, and it's not here now. Now, however you call that, it's wrong. And we need a treasurer who understands that $7.5 million, even when we're talking about 18 or 19 billion or 30 or $7.5 million is still real money. And we cannot just casually let that slip through the cracks. And you've seen all this. How many of you saw this year's paper? We're talking about budget deficit. They had to cut almost $1 billion, 1.4, depending on when you put the calendar, $1.4 billion shortfall from what we wanted to spend from the amount of money that we actually had to spend. $1.4 billion, and it was in the newspaper for every day of 120 days of